So this is the longest I've gone without a video since I started making them, and there's a good excuse for that. I had a bunch of dental work done, and it was kind of hard to talk. I still plan on doing a review of Witch Queen, and I'm gonna talk about Salt and Sacrifice, which I believe is not nearly as good as the first game. But after engaging with all of you about my Elden Ring video, I wanted to give a few more examples of the things that annoyed me about the game. And once I started, I ended up replaying the whole game, and then about half of an NG Plus run. And sometime during that whole thing, I started to understand why people's responses to Elden Ring is more divisive than the previous Souls games. It almost all boils down to the way the game is balanced and how easy it is to end up either over-leveled or under-leveled as you play. When you combine that with massive player power creep and bosses designed around that power creep, you get a game that can swing pretty wildly based on how you want to play and what kind of experience you look for in a Souls-like. I'm going to try to keep this short because the longer the videos are, the less views they get, and it feels like a massive fucking waste of my time to make a video for 300 people. So just a real quick look at Elden Ring's odd balance and the dangerous power creep From has allowed to seep into the game. After the logo. It's a big game. I get it that people seem to think that Elden Ring's massive size is an unambiguously good thing. I disagree. And it's not just that I generally prefer games in the 20-hour range because I like variety in my hobby. The size and length of Elden Ring has some significant effects on the gameplay in a way no previous title has. My complaints with Elden Ring boil down to a few things. 1. There are way too many 1 or 2 hit kills from bosses. 2. There were far too many enemies with seemingly endless attack chains. And 3. Too many bosses have punish windows that are way too short to actually feel fun. Let's start with the first one because many commenters on my last video seem to think my complaints about the game would be entirely solved by pumping a stupid amount of points into vigor. After a second playthrough, putting some extra points into vigor, the amount of one-hit kills does go down. But it does not at all solve my issues with bosses like Malenia, Radagon, and others. I'm not a big fan of open world games in general. Elden Ring is one of the best open world games I've played because I love Souls-like combat. But it's that good despite being an open world game, not because of it for me. After finishing Elden Ring, I went back to replay Sekiro and Bloodborne, and in my opinion, those games are vastly superior to Elden Ring in just about every way, aside from how long they are. I am not the kind of guy who likes to aimlessly wander a map. Hell, that's why I like Souls games as much as I do. They're tight and focused. You have a clear path that's carefully designed. The game presents carefully balanced challenges to you, and you overcome those challenges. I have never farmed levels in a Souls game, and I never found myself ever having to come back to something later. The entire core of my person is simply not wired to do that. The first time I saw that Black Knight in Undead Burg, I fought that fucking thing until I killed it. That's the kind of person I am. I'm stubborn. My first playthrough of Elden Ring, I fought the Tree Sentinel at level 1 and banged my head against him until he died. Every attack killed me, and it was frustrating, but I did it, and I knew that that was this game's version of the Black Knight in Undead Burg, or the Executioner at the beginning of Bloodborne. A one-time challenge for weirdos like me. Then I went further and came across the Crucible Knight, who also one-hit killed me with almost every attack. Has an extremely unfair heal punish that early in the game, and an extremely unintuitive tail swipe that he can do twice in a row, killing you with either one. That's when I started to get pissed off. Then I go to Stormveil, probably at about level 15 or so, and that's where an issue that's all through Elden Ring really became apparent. Stormveil at level 15 is extremely annoying, but almost nothing one-hit kills you, even at such a low level and with only a +2 weapon, which is what I had. The overpowered knights killed me a few times, but most of the stuff felt reasonable, and I made it through with nothing about it making me think I was insanely under-leveled or that I needed to go farm for souls. And then I had Margit one-hit kill me with most of his regular attacks. The fact is, if you follow the Sites of Grace and just make your way to Stormveil, you will arrive there under-leveled, and if you stick it out like me, you may stay under-leveled for a good long spell thereafter. and Elden Ring has a real problem with bosses doing massively more damage than the mobs within the level. If you go to Stormvale at level like 35, your introduction to the game would be much different than mine. My second playthrough, I cleared the entire zone before heading to the Legacy Dungeon, and I face-rolled the whole thing. I died once to the knight with the ridiculous AoE wind attack, and then I blew Margit up on the first try with ease. Souls games have always been extremely carefully balanced, but Elden Ring trades that for an open world, and as the result, the player has no real way to know if they're playing the game at the difficulty the developers intended. You can be certain that when you fight the Shadows of Yharnam in Bloodborne, you will be about the level the developers intended. This is simply not the case with Elden Ring, and as such, the difficulty of the encounters can vary wildly. This stays like this for the entire game. Malenia is still totally bullshit at level 150, but at level 75, she is just terrible. Nearly every attack takes 90% of your health, and a bunch of them one-hit kill you. This would be far less of a problem if the level itself communicated this to you. If the regular mobs did massive damage to the player, you would know you were underleveled, but that's not the case. Because more than any other game in the franchise, bosses do far more damage than enemies in their levels. So I could make it all the way up to Malenia at level 75 with no problem, only to find that everything she does kills me. In Dark Souls, if the Silver Knights in Anor Londo don't kill you in 2 hits, you can be sure that Ornstein and Smog are also not going to. But that's not the case in Elden Ring. You can roll through the level only to find the boss kills you in 1 hit with a regular attack. Either the bosses are overtuned, or the enemies around them are undertuned. Either way, it ends up with the player having no way to be certain they're around the level the devs intended for normal play. By the end of the game, being underleveled really piles up, so that almost every boss you fight is just a slog of one-hit kills. Again, the issue here is the game does a bad job of telling you when you are underleveled. Because if you have enough health to deal with regular mobs, you have every reason to think you'll have enough to deal with bosses. That's how these games have always worked, until now. My second playthrough, I cleared far more of the map, and ended up around the level that Fextra Life here says I should be for the areas, and this helped with the frustration of one-hit kill attacks. But there's another issue with Elden Ring that isn't addressed by leveling. Enemy design has to overcome overpowered players. Power creep in a Souls game? I cannot tell you how many Reddit threads I've seen with people complaining about a boss moveset, only to have a bunch of people in the comments be like, it was easy, I used Mimic Tier plus 10, Horfra Stomp, and then switched to Rivers of Blood to kill him in 2 minutes without getting hit. Elden Ring has several enemies and bosses with movesets that do not feel good to fight with the basic Dark Souls kit. Because magic, Ashes of War, and spirit summons are so insanely overpowered, the only way to make bosses and enemies even a small danger was to buff movesets to a ridiculous degree. If you like how that plays, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm not going to argue with you and say it's bad. It's not bad. It's different. I fully understand that we are moving into a subjective territory about what different people like in their Dark Souls. You might like peanut butter and chocolate, but I am a very simple man. I don't put condiments on food. Seriously, I don't, because I like the taste of the food itself, and sauce just fucks everything up. Here's why I do not like power creep in Elden Ring, and why I think the previous games are immeasurably better gameplay experiences. I do not summon in Souls games. Not because I'm trying to prove how big my dick is, but because I don't like what it does to the combat system. The very best Souls bosses end up feeling like a dance. You dodge for a little bit, and then you attack for a little bit. Usually, it feels like it's about a 50-50 split. Every 3 times you dodge, you get a few attacks in. You and the boss take turns. Sekiro is a little different, because in that game, even when you're playing defense, you are on offense, because parrying is about as effective as attacking. But as soon as you summon another player in, the combat utterly breaks down. You're not in a dance anymore, you're in a mosh pit. You aren't really carefully dancing with the boss, learning his attacks and getting it down so perfectly that it looks amazing even to watch. Instead, you take turns beating on the boss's back. You dodge a couple of times when he turns around, and then you go back to beating him in the back. This can be fun sometimes. Hell, I love getting summoned, I do it all the time. But it's not what the combat system does best. It's not what makes me love these games. The very simple and limited combat systems in Souls work so well because you're simply not that powerful in Dark Souls or Bloodborne. You have 2 attacks, a dodge, and a parry. The boss and the player feel like they're on an even playing field. But Elden Ring gives players ridiculously powerful toolkits. The Ashes of War are actually just the weapon arts from Dark Souls 3, but in Dark Souls 3, they were entirely niche little attacks that had very limited uses. There were some very powerful ones on boss weapons, but these caused massive weapon durability damage. So you couldn't use them all that much before your weapon literally broke and needed to be repaired. In Elden Ring, the weapon arts are insanely powerful and can be basically spammed. They're so powerful, you can use them to trivialize almost everything. The same is true for magic, which I used a little bit in Elden Ring. The Rock Sling spell and Glintstone Pebble are insanely powerful. I'm not sure why they thought it was a good idea to have this stuff. I can only assume they needed excellent rewards to populate the world with, and this is what they settled on. But once you add this stuff in the game, you're left with massive power creep that can only be overcome by pushing boss damage and movesets right to the edge of unfun. The Royal Revenant enemy is an excellent example of this. It constantly spews damage in poison pools. He lunges at you from 20 feet away. He never stops attacking, and he has a combo that's like 10 hits long. Fighting him normally is frustrating and annoying. He's balanced for a game with things like Rivers of Blood or Moonveil. But what happens when you use that stuff? It's boring and easy. You spam magic at him for a few seconds and he dies. He is annoying to fight normal and much too easy to fight if you use the tools the game gives you. In other words, I don't like the balance. But Elden Ring is supposed to be a Souls game, so there has to be bosses and enemies that are really hard. So how do you make enemies that can kill the player, even if they use Moonveil? Let me introduce you to one of the most infuriating enemies I have ever encountered in a video game. I got to Castle Sol under-leveled my first playthrough, and this place fucking tilted me with its bullshit. If you go there at the correct level, it's manageable, but it's still extremely frustrating, because the only way to challenge a player carrying an enemy delete button in both hands is to make the enemies positively toxic. The Banished Knights here have the same frustrating roll-catching AoE attacks, the same ridiculous poise, the same long combos and high damage, and they also teleport. But even these OP dudes are still obliterated by your OP toolkit, until you get to the dual-wielding one over here. This guy is the perfect example of how power creep makes the game frustrating. Fighting this thing is awful. He teleports all over the place. He literally has combos so long, you will run out of stamina dodging them. You can't block this stuff as the AoE still damages you. The only reason this guy is so broken is that they had to have something that can kill the player, but the player is far too powerful. This is why bosses are so ridiculously mobile. This is why Godfrey requires you to dodge 8 times for every single hit you get on him. This is why Radagon can literally spam AoE attacks and instantly teleport into an attack with almost no wind-up. I tried to play this game solo, and not using the Ashes of War as much as I could. But by the end of the game, everything is so ridiculous to overcome the outrageous power they gave to the player that it just didn't feel worth it. So I used the summons and Moonveil, and then what happens? It's not hard enough then. Godfrey is bullshit, with constant attacks, 3 different one-hit kill grabs, and a million massive AoE attacks. Fighting him straight up with a sword is insanely frustrating. But then using the tools the game gives you makes him a fucking joke that isn't at all rewarding. That's why the game is not well balanced in my opinion. It's too annoying and hard without the summons, but not hard enough with the summons. Giving the players free summons and overpowered weapons means the boss and enemy design has to be annoying as shit to pose any challenge at all. And then using the tools means nothing's hard enough. Every boss would be improved by raising their health by a lot and lowering their damage by a lot. I only ran out of Estus once, in my 2.5 playthroughs, and that was to Elden Beast. The fights aren't endurance tests anymore, they're almost all DPS races. You try to blow the boss up fast enough that he doesn't get to use his most frustrating attacks more than once or twice. Melina is all about winning before she can do the waterfowl dance more than twice. The entire fight depends on how often she does it. If she doesn't do it in Phase 2, you win. If she does it 3 times in Phase 2, you lose. That's not interesting to me. It's not like fighting Frida or Owl Father. Owl Father is quite difficult to learn, but every time you die, you instantly know what happened. And you'll die to almost all of his attacks, because the entire fight is a threat. Melina will only kill you with 3 moves. The entire fight revolves around those 3 instant kill attacks. Godfrey is the same thing. Elden Beast is the same thing. I recently just went back to refight some Sekiro bosses, and dying never leaves you wondering how you were supposed to deal with a move. Owl Father is an insanely hard boss, so is Ishin. It requires you to perfectly respond to all of his moves and constantly keep pressure on. It took me about 7 tries to even get the feel for it again. But every one of those tries got better. Nothing he does leaves you confused about how to respond. Then there's Radagon, who even after fighting him 3 times, there are several attacks I do not understand how to dodge. And a bunch of others that feel deliberately designed to trick you. Fighting Owl, Father, or Ishin, you will run out of healing while you learn the fight because they don't have one-hit kills. And they're still extremely hard. Elden Ring bosses never ever result in you running out of healing because all the deaths come from making one mistake, or dying to an attack you don't even know how to dodge. Elden Ring bosses do so much damage, it's not a dance anymore, it's a race. While I think bosses attack far too often in Elden Ring, there are examples of this done well. The bell-bearing hunters are stupidly overpowered when you first meet them because the game is poorly balanced, but the actual moveset is very cool, it's almost like the Pursuer. Watch this here. Yes, you can only attack once per punish window, but this still ends up feeling like a dance, because the attacks make sense, and you spend as much time attacking as dodging. His attacks are easy to understand, they're not stupidly delayed, and he only has 1 AoE. Compare that to Radagon, where he has like 10 different AoE attacks, or Godfrey, who just never fucking stops attacking. These guys right here are actually pretty okay once you get them down, but they suffer from the same thing. Constant attack chains. This is fine in moderation. I can enjoy fighting one of these guys once in a while. I actually quite enjoyed the boss version of him. But it's exhausting to fight 5 of them directly in a row, or 3 of them at once. I have never been someone to run past enemies in Souls games. Ever. Even on runs back to the boss, I have always killed every single enemy in my path. Seriously, I have just never done it. Elden Ring had me running past enemies fairly consistently because movesets have gotten frustrating. Finally, the difficulty in the second half of the game is clearly balanced not around learning the game, but around access to overpowered tools. Enemy movesets and damage start to get absurd. In the blood area on the way to Mog, the bird things have a moveset that's so confusing to deal with. It has a move that I'm almost positive is literally taken directly from the sharks in the Bloodborne DLC, where they flop on the ground and just flop all over the place. What the fuck is that? An attack I loathe in Bloodborne too, by the way. They attack erratically and leave almost no openings to attack back. They jump in the air and spin your camera. They actually end up hitting you behind a shield so you can't even block it. The game very much devolves into just burning things down as fast as possible, because you get to a point where enemy movesets don't make intuitive visual sense anymore. Although these bird things are amazingly animated, the art design is as amazing as ever. It's awesome. These things look great. They're fucking horrible to fight, just awful. There are still great fights in this game, of course. The Dragon Lord Plastidable whatever his name is a great fight. I actually really like the gargoyles when you are leveled enough to not be one-hit killed by every attack. But even there, fighting 2 of them at once is stupid. The Godskin Duo is a fight that basically entirely depends on you blowing him up as fast as possible, because their ridiculous movesets start overlapping and killing you. So you kill one, and then kill the other, and just camp the spawn. That's the way it's supposed to be done. Fighting them 2 at once is awful, just awful. All these issues boil down to the same thing. The game isn't well balanced because unlike the last games, you can end up ridiculously under or over leveled. and as such, the game isn't as perfectly tuned as the previous ones are. And perhaps more important, the player is massively overpowered, and as a result, the bosses and enemies in the late game need to be positively obnoxious to make up for it. In conclusion, by the end of the game, the bosses are so OP that fighting them solo without Ashes of War feels like shit, but you are so OP that actually using that stuff makes the game too easy. That's like the definition of being not well balanced. Souls games are my very, very favorite games ever. I sincerely hope that this is the last open world one they make for a while. I like Elden Ring. People seem to act in the comments as if I was saying it was terrible. It's not. I liked it a lot. It's very good. But Elden Ring is no Sekiro, and it's no Bloodborne. It's just not well enough balanced to compare with those games. Those games are basically perfect. Elden Ring is not. Alright, thanks for coming. I'll see you next time. Bye.